Virgin Mafia boss. Waited 5 years for his bride. But what arrived was a woman twice his size. A virgin mafia boss, bound by a blood contract, opens his doors for the delicate bride he was promised. Instead, a fearless, plus-size woman steps out of the SUV and says she came in her cousin's place. The house locks down. The vow stays unbroken. Sparks fly anyway. Then the bullets start. Someone inside tipped off his enemies. Her ledgers whisper a pattern only a traitor would know. Signed by someone close, maybe family. A chapel wedding by candlelight. And a setup that makes her look guilty. Now the most controlled man in the city must choose. Trust the woman who defied his expectations or the lies he was raised to believe. As fire, vows, and betrayal collide, desire turns dangerous and protection turns personal. Who set the trap? The bride, the family, or the mole in his own house? If he gives in to her, does he lose his empire or finally save it? Thunder rattled the estate's windows as Talia's heels clicked against polished marble. 2 armed men flanked her, their footsteps a menacing echo behind her own. Ahead, Silas Vieri moved like a shadow in his tailored black suit, shoulders rigid with tension. The grand hallway stretched before them, lined with oil paintings of stern-faced patriarchs. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across gilt frames and velvet draperies. Outside, lightning illuminated rain-slicked gardens through towering windows. Talia kept her spine straight, though her heart hammered. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, stepping into her cousin Marina's place, offering herself to fulfill a 5-year-old contract. But the way Silas had looked at her in the foyer, his dark eyes turning to steel, told her this would be harder than she'd imagined. He led them into his study, a fortress of mahogany and leather. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines gleaming in the warm lamplight. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface pristine except for a single laptop and phone. "Leave us!" Silas commanded. The guards retreated, closing the heavy doors with a soft click. Talia stood her ground as Silas circled her, his movements precise and controlled. She could feel his gaze assessing every detail, from her practical black dress to the simple pearl earrings that had been her mother's. "You understand this changes everything," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "Marina was vetted, guaranteed. You are an unknown variable." "I understand completely," Talia met his gaze. "And I'm prepared for whatever verification you require." A muscle twitched in his jaw. 72 hours of confined observation, no contact with the outside world. A priest will remain on standby to perform the ceremony, if your story proves true. Rain lashed against the windows as Talia processed his words. 3 days under lock and key, watched like a suspect. But she'd expected nothing less from the man who'd spent years building an impenetrable empire. "Your terms are fair," she said, "though I hope you'll allow me to prove myself useful during my confinement. I have skills that could benefit your organization." Silas's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "What skills?" "Financial forensics, pattern analysis. I can spot shell accounts and trace money laundering schemes that most miss." She took a measured breath. "It's how I knew my family was being bled dry 5 years ago when this contract was signed." His stillness became more focused, like a predator catching a scent. "You're claiming expertise in syndicate finances. I'm claiming expertise in following paper trails and finding where money really flows." Talia held his gaze. "My cousin Marina is gentle, innocent, everything a traditional bride should be. I'm offering something different. Partnership." Lightning flashed outside, casting sharp shadows across Silas's face. For a moment, she glimpsed the weight of legacy in his features, the burden of an empire built on blood and iron control. "Partnership requires trust," he said finally, "and trust must be earned." "I agree completely." Talia glanced at the ornate clock on the mantel as it began to strike 10. Each crystalline chime seemed to echo in the tension-filled room. The last note was still fading when Silas's phone buzzed. His expression didn't change as he read the message, but Talia caught the subtle tightening of his shoulders. She waited, pulse steady despite the storm of uncertainty. She'd known the risks when she'd stepped into Marina's place. Known that offering herself to the notorious Vieri heir meant walking into a viper's nest of politics and power. The rain continued its assault on the windows, creating rivers of shadow on the study's rich carpets. Silas's phone lay face down on his desk now, but its presence felt like a loaded gun between them. "Your quarters are being prepared," he said finally. "You'll have everything you need, but no outside communication, My security chief will escort you shortly." Talia nodded, recognizing the dismissal. But as she turned to leave, she paused. "Mr. Vieri, I know you have no reason to trust me yet, but I hope you'll remember that I came here openly, under my own name, offering truth instead of the comfortable fiction you were promised." For a moment, something almost soft flickered across his face. Gone so quickly, she might have imagined it. Then his mask of control settled back into place, and he inclined his head in acknowledgement. The study door opened, revealing a broad-shouldered man in a black suit. As Talia followed him out, she felt Silas's gaze on her back, heavy with the weight of suspicion and something else she couldn't quite name. Thunder shook the estate's foundations as they walked down the lamplit corridor, each step taking her deeper into the heart of Vieri territory. The security chief moved with military precision, leading her past closed doors and watchful guards. Behind them, in his study, Silas stood at the rain-streaked windows. His encrypted phone lay silent now, but its warning message burned in his mind. "Your bride is bait. Eyes inside." Dawn crept over the Vieri estate, painting the marble halls in shades of rose and gold. The breakfast trays between Silas and Talia sat untouched, steam dissipating from perfectly arranged eggs and fresh pastries. They faced each other across his private study's antique desk, the morning's quiet broken only by the scratch of his pen as he made notes. "Your family's debts," Silas said, voice clinically detached. "Break them down." Talia picked up her coffee cup, letting its warmth seep into her fingers. $3 million to the Costello family, 2 to private investors, the rest scattered across various holdings that all trace back to Arturo Rossi. Silas's pen stilled. "Interesting that you can track those connections." "As I mentioned last night, it's what I do." She set down her cup with precision. "Following money is like reading a story. Every transaction leaves footprints." A soft knock interrupted them. Elio entered, his movements careful and measured. Silas gestured him forward. "You'll shadow Ms. Brooks during her stay. Full surveillance, no blind spots." "Of course, sir." Elio's response was prompt, professional. Bastian appeared next, tablet in hand. "Communications sweep is underway. We're down to core staff only." Silas nodded, dismissing them both. His attention returned to Talia, studying her with the same intensity she'd shown while cataloging the room's exits and angles during their conversation. "Why did you really take Marina's place?" he asked. "Because she would have broken here." Talia's answer was immediate, unflinching. "Marina's gentle, raised to be decorative. This world would destroy her. And you? I was raised in reality. I've seen what debt does to families, what power does to people." She leaned forward slightly. "I have terms of my own, Mr. Vieri." His eyebrow lifted fractionally. "Do you?" "My mother receives full protection, non-negotiable." Talia's voice remained steady. "The contract's intimate requirements need clear boundaries and timeline, and I want full access to the financial records mentioned in Section 12, subsection 4. Silas's surprise flickered briefly before his control reasserted itself. Few people had read the contract's fine print that carefully, let alone understood its implications. "You're not in a position to negotiate," he reminded her. "I'm always in a position to negotiate. You need a wife who understands this world. I need my family protected." She held his gaze. "We can help each other?" Something shifted in Silas's expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. He'd expected a frightened replacement bride. Instead, he had someone who spoke his language. "The physical aspects of the contract remain my choice," he said finally. "My vow stands." "The famous celibacy oath?" A hint of amusement touched her lips. "Yes, I've heard the rumors. I have no intention of pushing those boundaries." He studied her for a long moment before standing. "Walk with me. You should know the layout." They moved through the estate like pieces on a chessboard, Elio a silent shadow behind them. Silas pointed out security measures, restricted areas, the daily patterns of house operation. Talia absorbed it all, her eyes marking camera angles and patrol rotations with professional interest. "You're cataloging escape routes," he observed as they climbed to the upper floor. "Survival habit," she shrugged. "Though I notice you're showing me exactly what you want me to see." The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Survival habit." They reached his private wing, where reinforced doors and biometric locks created a fortress within the fortress. Silas pressed his palm to a scanner, leading her into a suite of rooms decorated in muted blues and grays. "These will be your quarters," he said, "connected to mine, but with separate entrances. The security is absolute." Talia ran her fingers along a mahogany bookshelf. "Gilded cage?" "Protected space," he corrected. "Until we know who's watching." She turned to face him, reading the tension in his shoulders. "The message last night, about me being bait." "Yes." His jaw tightened. "Someone knew you were coming, someone who has access to my private line. Then we both need to watch our backs." She moved to the window, looking down at the sweeping driveway below. "Though I notice you're keeping me close instead of throwing me out." "Keep your enemies closer?" There was a hint of dark humor in his voice. "Am I your enemy, Mr. Vieri?" Before he could answer, movement caught their attention. A dark sedan had pulled up to the main gates, its engine idling. Silas's hand went to his phone, but Talia touched his arm. "Wait," she murmured. "Let's see what they do." They stood in silence, watching. After 2 minutes, the car pulled away, leaving nothing but scattered gravel and the heavy weight of unseen eyes. Silas moved to the door, engaging a final deadbolt that sealed them into the protected wing. The sound echoed with finality, but Talia noticed his hand lingered on the lock longer than necessary. "I'm not your enemy," she said quietly, "but I'm not your perfectly obedient bride either." He turned, and for a moment she glimpsed something raw beneath his control. A flash of the man behind the Empire's mask. Then it was gone, replaced by careful neutrality. "Get settled," he said. "Elia will bring you anything you need. We'll talk more at dinner." Talia watched him leave, listening to his measured footsteps fade down the hallway. Through the window she could still see the faint tire tracks where the sedan had waited, a silent reminder that somewhere beyond these walls, someone was watching, waiting, planning their next move. She moved deeper into her new quarters, noting the expensive furnishings, the subtle security cameras, the reinforced windows. A gilded cage, yes, but also a fortress. And for now, that would have to be enough. The scratch of Talia's pen against paper echoed in the quiet corridor. She paused, tilting her head as she marked another dot on her crude map, counting under her breath. 3 cameras in this section alone, their red lights blinking in steady rhythm, not counting the hidden ones she'd spotted behind the artwork. From the library balcony above, Silas watched her methodical documentation. His fingers drummed silently against the carved railing, mind cycling through possibilities. She moved like someone who understood surveillance, marking blind spots with practiced ease. Either she was planning an escape, or she was securing her own safety. Both options concerned him. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the high windows, painting golden rectangles across the marble floor. Talia stepped carefully around them, making another notation. Her presence here was a riddle he couldn't solve, too competent to be a simple replacement bride, too direct to be a plant. "The northeast corner has a gap in coverage," she called up without looking at him. "Might want to fix that?" Silas's jaw tightened. She'd found a weakness in under an hour that his security team had missed for months. "You seem very familiar with security systems. When your family loses everything, you learn to spot the ways people can hurt you." She turned a page, pen moving again. "Speaking of which, your guest wing has too many entry points." The crack of gunfire shattered the quiet. Silas vaulted over the railing, landing with feline grace. In 3 long strides, he reached Talia, pulling her behind a massive marble pillar as bullets chipped stone nearby. Her notebook clattered to the floor. "Stay here," he ordered, voice glacier cold as he drew his weapon. 2 men in tactical gear burst through the eastern door. Silas moved like liquid violence, disarming the first with a brutal twist that ended in a sickening crack. The man screamed, his wrist bent at an impossible angle. The second attacker raised his gun, but Silas was already moving. His shot took out a chunk of wall inches from the man's head, a warning that sent both intruders scrambling back through the door. More gunfire erupted outside, followed by shouts and the thunder of running feet. Silas's security team responding, containment protocols engaging. Steel shutters slid down over windows with pneumatic hisses. Talia stayed behind the pillar, heart pounding but hands steady. She could run now, use the chaos as cover. But beyond these walls waited whoever had sent these men, whoever had known she was coming. At least here, the danger wore a familiar face. "Clear!" came a shout from outside. Silas moved back to her position, his expression carved from stone. Only his eyes betrayed the rage simmering beneath that control. "Are you hurt?" "No." Talia retrieved her fallen notebook, straightening slowly. "Though I think we can add Eastern Wall security to my list of concerns." His laugh was sharp and without humor. "You're critiquing my security after being shot at. Better than falling apart." She met his gaze steadily. "Besides, I'm starting to think staying here is safer than the alternatives." Something shifted in his expression, recognition perhaps of the choice she was making. They both knew she could have run. Instead, she was choosing to stay behind his walls, under his protection. "The war room," he said after a moment. "Now." They moved through the estate's locked-down corridors, passing guards with drawn weapons and staff, hurrying to secure rooms. Silas's hand stayed at the small of her back, guiding her with surprising gentleness for someone who had just broken a man's wrist. At the war room entrance, Talia paused. Through the doorway, she could see a massive map spread across one wall, dotted with red pins that created an ominous constellation. In the center, circled twice in thick black marker, was a single word: leak. "Sir," a guard approached with urgent steps. "We need you for the briefing." Silas nodded, then turned to Talia. "Wait in your quarters. Elio will escort you." "I could help," she offered. "I notice things." "Yes." His eyes flicked to her notebook. "That's what concerns me." He disappeared into the war room, leaving Talia with Elio's watchful presence and the echo of gunfire still ringing in her ears. As she turned to leave, she caught one last glimpse of that map, of all those red pins pointing to something larger, something dangerous enough to send armed men through stone walls and bulletproof glass, something that had known exactly when she would arrive. Elio cleared his throat pointedly, and Talia allowed him to lead her away. Her fingers traced the edges of her notebook, where she'd drawn her own map of vulnerabilities and blind spots. She'd come here to protect her family, to honor a contract. Now she was caught in something bigger, a game where the players used bullets instead of pawns. There was no way out that didn't go through Silas Vieri. The question was whether he would be her shield or her jailer. The sound of rapid footsteps and urgent voices faded behind them as they climbed to the protected wing. Talia could feel the weight of surveillance cameras tracking their movement, could sense the invisible web of security tightening around the estate like a net, or perhaps like a noose. She thought of Silas's fluid violence, the way he'd moved without hesitation to put himself between her and danger, the careful distance he kept even as he stayed close enough to protect. A man of contradictions, brutal yet controlled, suspicious yet protective. Evening shadows were beginning to gather in the corners as Elio led her to her quarters. Somewhere below, in a room full of red pins and black circles, Silas was planning his next move, and Talia was left to wonder if she'd made the right choice in staying, if the protection of these walls was worth the price of being caught between whoever wanted in and the man determined to keep them out. The war room hummed with tense energy as Bastian methodically pinned surveillance photos to the corkboard. Each image showed masked figures scaling the eastern wall, their movements precise and professional. The timestamp sequence blinked accusingly from the corner of each photo. 1542, 1543, 1544. "Morozov's men," Gianna stated flatly, her fingers flying over a tablet. "The gear matches their latest shipment manifests, but they shouldn't have known the route." Silas stood at the head of the long table, his shoulders rigid as he studied the growing display. "Show me the SUV tracking data." Bastian pulled up a map overlay, red dots marking the vehicle's path from the airport. "Someone transmitted our position every 3 minutes, starting the moment we left the terminal." His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering unwelcome news. "The signal originated from inside our network." Talia, seated at the far end of the table, felt her breath catch. The timing pattern was hauntingly familiar, the same 3-minute intervals her father had highlighted in his books before everything fell apart, before the shell accounts emptied and the collectors came, before he'd disappeared, leaving only ledgers full of desperate notes. She forced her expression to remain neutral, but something must have shown because Silas's attention shifted to her face, sharp and assessing. Their eyes met across the war room's expanse. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Silas turned to Gianna. "I want full camera coverage of the nursery wing, every feed from the last month." "The nursery wing's been sealed for years," Bastian objected. "Exactly." Silas's voice was ice. "Check it anyway." Talia watched the exchange with careful attention. The nursery wing, where Silas himself had grown up, if the estate blueprints were accurate, a protected space, now possibly compromised. She filed the detail away, noting how Gianna nodded and slipped from the room without question. "The attack pattern suggests insider knowledge," Bastian continued, tapping another photo. They knew exactly where the blind spots were, which guards would be rotating. This level of intel doesn't come cheap. Or easy, Talia found herself saying. All eyes turned to her, but she pressed on. 3-minute intervals are specific. It's a trader's pattern, used to track market movements without overwhelming the system. Someone's treating this like a financial operation. Silas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. You recognize it? It wasn't a question. Talia met his gaze steadily. My father was an accountant. He kept detailed records. The unspoken weight of those words hung in the air. Bastian's fingers stilled over his keyboard. Even the guards by the door seemed to tense. But Silas merely nodded, turning back to the display. Cross-reference all personnel with banking backgrounds. Priority on anyone hired in the last 5 years. The meeting continued for another hour. Strategies proposed and discarded. Security protocols adjusted. Through it all, Talia felt Silas's occasional glance, measuring her reactions. He'd given her a gift in that moment. The courtesy of not pushing, of letting her keep her secrets a little longer. She wasn't sure if that made him dangerous or worthy of trust. By midnight, the war room had emptied, except for Bastian, still hunched over his screens. Talia's escort led her back through the silent corridors, past reinforced windows that reflected their movement like dark mirrors. Sleep proved impossible. The 3-minute pattern haunted her, along with memories of her father's increasingly desperate notations. After an hour of staring at shadows, she slipped from her bed and padded to Silas's library. The room was massive, 2 stories of books rising into darkness. Only a single lamp burned, casting warm light over the nearest shelves. Talia's fingers trailed along leather spines, searching for familiar titles. Her father had used a specific system, obscure but effective. If the same ledgers were here. She found the first accounting text on the 3rd shelf. Vintage, gilt-edged, identical to the ones that had filled her childhood home. Her heart beat faster as she pulled it free, pages crackling with age. The margin notes were different, but the organization was the same. More volumes followed, each a potential key to understanding who had destroyed her family and who might now be threatening Silas's organization. She settled cross-legged on the floor, spreading the books around her like pieces of a puzzle. The library's quiet wrapped around her like a cocoon as she worked, comparing notations and tracking patterns. Somewhere in these pages lay the truth, about her family's fall, about the leak in Silas's walls, about the connection between past and present betrayals. Time slipped away as she lost herself in the familiar rhythm of analysis. This was her element, numbers and patterns, secrets hidden in plain sight. Each ledger was another piece of evidence, another step toward understanding the web that had entangled both her family and the Vieri estate. The sound of footsteps made her look up. A guard passed the open doorway, pausing briefly to check on her before continuing his rounds. In the distance, she could hear the faint hum of security systems and the occasional crackle of radio chatter. She was safe here, surrounded by books and cameras and armed men. Safe, but not free. The same walls that protected her also held her, just as the knowledge she sought might either save or condemn her. Talia turned another page, lamplight gleaming on columns of numbers that held the power to change everything. Someone had used the system to orchestrate her family's destruction. Someone was using it now to breach Silas's defenses. All she had to do was find the pattern, follow the breadcrumbs, and hope the truth didn't cost more than she was willing to pay. The rasp of paper filled the library's midnight silence as Talia turned another page. Her shoulders ached from hours of cross-referencing ledgers, but she couldn't stop. Not when each volume held echoes of her past. The lamp cast a warm circle around her makeshift workspace on the floor, leather-bound books spread like fallen leaves. Her finger traced down a column of numbers, following the familiar dance of her father's system. Then she saw it. Her breath caught. Hidden in plain sight among standard shipping manifests was a pattern she'd seen before. Dates offset by 3-minute intervals, quantities that didn't quite add up. Find something interesting. Silas's voice came from the shadows. Talia's heart jumped, but she kept her hand steady on the page. He emerged into the lamplight, his presence filling the space between bookcases. She'd expected anger at finding her here, surrounded by his private records. Instead, his expression held something quieter, more contemplative. These entries, she said, tapping the page. They're using a cipher my father developed. Look, each third number is offset, creating a separate ledger within the legitimate one. Instead of demanding answers, Silas lowered himself to sit across from her, his movements controlled and deliberate. The carpet absorbed the sound of his weight. This close, she could see the fine threads of silver in his black shirt, the way his hands rested loose but ready on his knees. "Your father's system," he said. "The one that ruined your family." "Yes," Talia met his gaze. "Someone's using it here, in your books. Recent entries last 6 months." Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of shared understanding. Outside, wind stirred the trees, branches scratching against bulletproof glass. The lamp's glow caught the sharp planes of Silas's face as he studied her. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked finally. "Because secrets get people killed." Talia's voice was quiet but firm. "And I'm tired of watching people She stopped, swallowed. "People die because of hidden ledgers." Something shifted in Silas's expression. He reached for one of the books, his fingers brushing hers for a moment. The contact sent warmth spiraling up her arm. "I was 16, he said, eyes on the page but seeing something else entirely. "Her name was Marina. She worked in the kitchen, brought me extra desserts when I stayed up late studying." His jaw tightened. "Someone wanted leverage over my father. They missed their shot. She didn't." Talia's chest ached with understanding. "That's why you made your vow." "My body became a weapon the moment I was born into this family." His voice carried no self-pity, only steel certainty. "I decided it would never be used against me or anyone else again. No one would die because they shared my bed. No alliance would be sealed with my flesh. When I finally choose, it will be mine to give. Once. Completely." Heat bloomed between them, thick as summer air. Talia felt it like a physical touch. The possibility, the potential energy of his control and her challenge. His eyes met hers, dark with something that made her breath catch. But Silas leaned back, creating space while maintaining the connection. His respect for boundaries only made the attraction stronger. She found herself wanting to reach across that careful distance, to see what would happen if she pushed. Instead, she turned back to the ledger. "Here," she said, pointing to a sequence of dates. "This could help trace your leak. These numbers track something moving through your supply chain, something that shouldn't be there." Silas shifted closer, shoulder nearly touching hers, as he followed her explanation. His presence was a warmth along her side, distracting but welcome. She walked him through the pattern, showing how legitimate shipments were being used to mask other movements. "Clever," he murmured. "Using our own security protocols as cover?" His finger traced the column she indicated, following her logic. "This could be." A sharp electronic shriek cut through the air. The smoke alarm's wail made them both snap to attention. Silas was on his feet in an instant, pulling Talia up with him. The acrid scent of accelerant reached them, just as an orange glow flickered at the end of the corridor. His hand wrapped around her wrist, warm and sure. "Run!" They moved together through the darkness, leaving the lamp and ledgers behind. The heat of his grip anchored her as smoke began to fill the air around them. The fire roared through the east hall like a living thing, hungry and vicious. Orange flames licked up the expensive wallpaper, turning ancestral portraits to ash. Through the thick smoke, dark figures moved with purpose, not fleeing the blaze but feeding it. Talia's eyes burned as Silas pulled her forward. A support beam crashed behind them, showering sparks. Without hesitation, Silas's hands found her waist, lifting her over the smoldering wood as if she weighed nothing. His touch was firm but careful, even in crisis. "Cut the sprinklers manually!" His voice carried over the chaos, commanding his men through the comm unit at his collar. "Southwest Access Panel, override code Sierra 7. A masked figure lunged from the smoke, blade glinting. Silas pushed Talia behind him in one fluid motion. The attacker's wrist met Silas's grip with a precise, terrible crack. The knife clattered to the marble floor. The other shadows hesitated, witnessing their companion's agony. "This way." Silas guided her toward a hidden panel in the wall. It slid open to reveal a service stairwell, narrow but clear of smoke. His black shirt was singed at the shoulder, but his eyes remained focused, scanning constantly for threats. He tapped his comm unit twice. "Clean sweep, quiet." His voice was soft, but carried absolute authority. "No survivors." Talia heard muffled sounds of violence from the hall as Silas sealed the stairwell door. She didn't look back. Some things were better left unseen. They descended quickly, his hand steady at her lower back, until they reached a sub-level corridor. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No." Her voice was hoarse from smoke. "You're burned." He dismissed his injury with a slight shake of his head. "Surface damage!" They could hear the sprinkler system engaging above, water hissing against hot stone. Silas's men would be handling the aftermath, erasing evidence of both fire and retribution. The violence would be cleaned away, leaving only whispers. For several minutes, they stood in the dim emergency lighting, letting their breathing steady. Silas kept one hand near his weapon, the other close to Talia, but not touching. Always protective, never presuming. "They knew exactly when to strike," he said finally. "The ledgers were a distraction to get us isolated. Someone wanted us in that library." "To kill us both?" Talia asked. "To kill you." His jaw tightened. "And make me watch, like Marina." The name hung between them, heavy with memory and pain. Talia studied his face, the controlled fury, the shadows of old grief, and something else. Fear, perhaps. Not for himself, but for her. "They'll try again," she said quietly. "Yes." Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The smell of smoke clung to their clothes. Above them, Silas's men would be disposing of bodies, securing the scene. Protection turned outward, violence kept at arm's length from her, but present nonetheless. "There's a solution," he said, watching her carefully. "Not ideal, but effective." "Marriage," Talia concluded. "Now, not later." He nodded once. "My name carries weight. My protection becomes legally absolute. Without it—" He paused, choosing his words. "You remain vulnerable, a target." The practical part of her mind processed the strategic advantage. The emotional part noticed how he kept his distance, how his hands remained carefully at his sides despite the tension thrumming through him. "Your vow," she said softly. "This wouldn't break it. The marriage would be legal, public. The rest—" His eyes met hers, dark and intent. "That remains mine to give, when I choose." Heat that had nothing to do with the fire curled through her belly. The power of his control, the promise in his restraint made her skin tingle. "You'd bind yourself to protect me," she said, "without claiming the traditional rights of a husband." "Yes." Simple, absolute. Water continued its steady drip in the darkness. Somewhere above, the last embers of the fire were dying, leaving behind sodden ruins and silent bodies. Dawn was approaching. She could feel it in the quality of the air, the weight of the hour. A medic appeared at the end of the corridor, summoned by some silent signal. Silas allowed his burned forearm to be examined and wrapped, his eyes never leaving Talia's face. The bandage was more precaution than necessity. The injury was superficial, already healing. Talia watched the careful movements of his hands, the controlled power in his shoulders. He was offering her his name, his protection, without demanding her body in return. It was both more and less than the original contract had promised. The medic finished and withdrew, leaving them in charged silence. Silas pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "The priest can be here within the hour," he said quietly. "Or I can arrange safe transport to anywhere you choose. Your decision." Talia felt the weight of the moment, the convergence of danger and destiny. She thought of the ledgers upstairs, the cipher that connected their pasts. She thought of his careful distance and burning eyes. She nodded once, the movement measured and deliberate. "Call the priest." Silas's finger tapped the screen, setting their future in motion. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, dawn creeping over the smoke-stained grounds. In 2 hours, she would be his wife, protected by his name, guarded by his strength, but untouched until he chose to give himself completely. The bandage on his arm was stark white against his skin, a reminder of how quickly he'd moved to shield her from harm. Violence turned outward, protection turned inward. This was the man she was choosing, controlled, lethal, and somehow still gentle when he looked at her. Latin echoed off stone walls, as ancient as prayer itself. Candlelight flickered across the chapel's marble floor, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with the priest's steady intonation. The air still carried traces of smoke and water, a reminder of the violence that had brought them to this moment. Talia stood beside Silas in the same clothes she'd worn during the attack, her hair slightly damp from the sprinklers. She'd refused to delay for appearance's sake, drawing a quiet look of approval from her soon-to-be husband. Even now, she could feel the weight of his presence beside her, controlled power held carefully in check. "Before we proceed," she whispered, turning to face him. The priest paused, sensing the importance of the moment. "I won't be hidden away like a secret. Any decision that affects my life, I need to be part of it." Silas studied her face in the wavering light. His expression remained neutral, but something sparked in his eyes. Respect, perhaps even admiration. "You'll have both protection and partnership," he said, his voice low and certain. "I'll shield you as my wife and value you as my equal, and—" He paused, gaze intensifying. "I'll wait until you ask me not to." The promise hung between them, heavy with meaning. Talia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she held his gaze. Around them, the estate's loyal staff served as witnesses, including Gianna, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. The priest resumed his Latin, the ancient words binding them together in ways that went beyond mere legality. Talia felt the weight of each syllable, understanding that this wasn't just about protection, it was about choice, trust, and the peculiar tenderness that could exist even in dangerous places. When the moment came for their first kiss, Silas moved with deliberate slowness. His hand cupped her cheek with impossible gentleness, thumb brushing her skin as if memorizing its texture. When his lips met hers, it was a study in controlled passion, tender but claiming, restrained yet full of promise. The house seemed to exhale around them as if releasing a breath long held. The witnesses began to disperse, footsteps echoing on marble. Gianna lingered, her expression tightening with news that couldn't wait. She approached them with measured steps, professional mask firmly in place. "The cameras in the nursery wing have been accessed," she reported quietly. "Someone's been watching feeds from areas you've kept restricted for years." Silas's body tensed beside Talia, though his hand remained gentle where it rested against her back. The nursery wing? She'd heard whispers about it. Knew it held memories he preferred not to revisit. Those cameras were his personal domain, their feeds protected by layers of security that few could penetrate. "When?" he asked, voice clipped. "Multiple times over the past month. The access pattern suggests intimate knowledge of the system's blind spots." Gianna's eyes flicked to Talia, then back to Silas. "Whoever it is, they know your habits. They know when you check the feeds yourself." Sunlight began creeping across the chapel floor, morning asserting itself despite the gravity of the moment. Talia watched the interplay of light and shadow, thinking of the ledgers she'd found, the familiar cipher that connected past to present. Someone who knew Silas's habits. Someone who understood his security. The puzzle pieces were there, waiting to be assembled. Gianna withdrew after delivering her report, her footsteps precise and measured. The chapel emptied slowly, leaving Silas and Talia standing in the growing morning light. His palm found its way to her lower back, warm and steady through the fabric of her clothes. "Come," he said softly. "It's been a long night." They moved through the quiet halls together, their footsteps synchronized without conscious effort. Guards nodded respectfully as they passed, already rotating to night positions despite the early hour. The attack had disrupted normal schedules, leaving the estate in a state of heightened vigilance. Talia noticed how Silas guided her away from the scorched sections of the house, choosing paths that wouldn't remind her of danger. His consideration was evident in every small gesture, the way he matched his pace to hers, how his hand remained protective but never possessive. They reached his suite, their suite now, and paused at the threshold. Sunlight spilled through high windows, illuminating the space that would become their shared sanctuary. Their shadows merged on the floor, a visual representation of their new unity. "Your things will be moved here," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "But you can have your own room if you prefer, adjacent with connecting doors." "Thank you," she replied, touched by his continued respect for her boundaries. "But I think I'd rather stay close." Something flickered in his eyes. Pleasure, perhaps, or relief. He guided her across the threshold, into the space that would witness their gradual transition from arranged marriage to something deeper, something chosen. Guards took their positions outside, a reminder that danger still lurked beyond these walls. But here, in this moment, Talia felt the rightness of her decision. She had married a dangerous man who handled her with impossible gentleness, who promised protection without demanding submission. The morning sun continued its steady advance, warming the polished floors and casting long shadows behind them. In the distance, they could hear the estate coming alive, servants beginning their daily routines, security teams changing shifts, life continuing, adapting to new circumstances, finding its rhythm in the aftermath of chaos. Silas's hand remained steady at her back, grounding her in the present moment. They stood together in the growing light, newly married, surrounded by threats, yet somehow safe in each other's presence. The day stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and mysteries to unravel, but for now they allowed themselves this quiet moment of connection. The chess piece made a soft click against the board as Talia moved her knight. Moonlight spilled through the suite's high windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. 3 nights of sharing space had created an unexpected comfort between them, a rhythm of quiet conversations and strategic games that filled the hours when sleep proved elusive. Silas studied the board, his fingers hovering over a pawn. The proximity between them charged the air with unspoken awareness. His sleeve brushed her hand as he reached across, and she felt the slight catch in his breath. "Your defense is improving," he noted, voice low to avoid disturbing the night's stillness. "I had a good teacher," Talia smiled, remembering her father's patient lessons. The memory sparked an idea she'd been turning over since discovering the familiar cipher in the ledgers. "Speaking of strategy, I think I know how we can identify our mole." Silas's attention shifted from the game to her face, reading her expression with the same intensity he brought to everything that mattered. "Go on." "The ledger system," she said, leaning forward. "We plant false information, a transfer too tempting to ignore, something that only someone with inside access would see." He considered this, fingers absently tracing the edge of the chessboard. "A trap." "Yes." Talia met his gaze steadily. "But it needs to be perfect, authentic enough to convince someone who knows your operation intimately." Silas stood, moving to his desk with fluid grace. He unlocked a hidden drawer and withdrew a small black notebook. His hesitation was brief but noticeable before he extended it to her. "My personal cipher key," he explained quietly. "No one else has ever seen it." The weight of his trust settled over her as she accepted the notebook. Its pages contained years of carefully coded transactions, the backbone of his empire's security. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. "We'll need to create a transfer that looks urgent but not suspicious," she said, studying his precise notations. "Something that would require immediate approval." They worked through the night, heads bent close together over the desk. Talia crafted the false transfer with meticulous care, weaving it into existing patterns while Silas added authentic details only an insider would recognize. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, each contact sending awareness skittering along her skin. Dawn was approaching when they finished. The trap was elegant in its simplicity, a 7-figure transfer disguised as emergency funds for a compromised shipping route. They embedded it in the system's deep architecture, where only those with highest clearance could find it. "Now we wait," Silas murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Hours passed in tense anticipation. They attempted normal routines. Breakfast brought by trusted staff, security briefings with Gianna, discussions about estate repairs. But their attention kept returning to the monitoring system, watching for any sign their bait had been taken. Late afternoon brought the alert they'd been waiting for. Someone had accessed the transfer, examined it thoroughly, and, most crucially, approved it with their personal signature. Talia reached the desk first, Silas close behind her. The signature glowed on the screen, elegant and unmistakable. Arturo Vieri. She felt Silas go still beside her, his breath catching, his uncle, his mentor, the man who had guided him through childhood, who had shaped him into the leader he'd become. "No," he whispered, but the evidence was irrefutable. The betrayal was written in that familiar flourish, in the timestamp that proved Arturo had accessed their trap from his private terminal. Talia covered Silas's hand where it rested on the desk, feeling the hard rhythm of his pulse beneath her fingers. His skin was cool, but she could sense the storm building beneath his controlled exterior. Gianna materialized in the doorway, her face grave. "I'll verify it twice before we move forward," she said quietly, understanding the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. "We'll need absolute certainty." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of computers. Talia maintained her gentle grip on Silas's hand, offering wordless support as he processed this revelation. She knew the weight of family betrayal, intimately, had lived through its bitter aftermath with her own father. Outside, the estate continued its daily rhythm. Guards patrolled, servants moved efficiently through their tasks, repairs proceeded on the fire-damaged wing. But here in this room, time seemed suspended around the truth they'd uncovered. Silas's fingers slowly curled around hers, accepting the comfort she offered. His other hand reached for the chess piece still clutched in his pocket. The Black King she'd noticed him carrying since their marriage. A reminder she realized of the game he'd been playing all along. "He's been watching us," Silas said finally, voice controlled, despite the tension visible in his jaw. Using the nursery wing cameras, accessing restricted feeds, he knew about the attack, knew about the fire. And now we know about him, Talia replied softly, squeezing his hand. Gianna moved silently to the computer, beginning her verification process. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, checking and double-checking the signature's authenticity. The room remained hushed, heavy with the weight of discovered truth. Sunlight slanted through the windows, highlighting dust motes in its golden beam. The chessboard sat abandoned on the side table, pieces frozen in their eternal struggle. Talia thought about patterns, in games and ledgers and betrayals, about how the most dangerous moves often came from those closest to you. Silas's pulse continued its steady rhythm under her touch, a counterpoint to the soft clicks of Gianna's typing. His breathing had steadied, but she could feel the coiled energy in him, like a spring compressed to its limit. The man who had become her husband in fire and chaos was now facing a different kind of burn, the acid sting of betrayal from one he'd trusted above all others. The afternoon light deepened to amber as they waited for Gianna's confirmation. Talia remained beside Silas, their hands joined on the desk, while the truth of Arturo's signature glowed accusingly on the screen before them. Bastian's printer hummed steadily, spitting out page after page of damning evidence. The logs formed neat stacks on his desk, each one a fresh wound in the story of two families destroyed by calculated greed. The money trail is unmistakable, he said, voice clipped as he handed another sheet to Silas. Arturo moved funds through shell companies, then filtered them into Morozov Holdings. From there, they were reinvested in dummy corporations that specifically targeted Vieri shipping operations. Talia leaned closer, recognizing the same patterns that had haunted her father's final ledgers. These account numbers, she said, tapping the paper. They matched the transfers that bankrupted my family's business 5 years ago. Silas's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. A muscle jumped in his jaw as he stared at the evidence of his uncle's betrayal. The control he wore like armor was starting to crack. He built this empire with my father, he said, voice dangerously quiet. Helped raise me after... He cut himself off, shoving away from the desk with enough force to make the papers flutter. Talia watched him pace, seeing the predator beneath his usual precise movements. But rather than let him spiral into rage, she focused on practical action. We need to secure the evidence chain first, she said firmly. Bastian, make 3 copies of everything, store them separately. Silas paused, his attention caught by her measured tone. She continued. Then we lock down the staff list. Anyone who's had access to the nursery wing cameras needs to be vetted again. The nursery wing, Silas repeated, something dark flickering in his expression. He's been boldest there, using cameras that should have been... He stopped again, but Talia understood. Those cameras had once protected his childhood, and Arturo had turned them into tools of surveillance. We can use that, she said. Set a trap where he feels most confident. Bastian looked up from his printing. The chapel's connected to that wing. All the security feeds run through the same hub. Perfect, Talia nodded. We plant a copied drive with time-stamped feeds. Make it look like we've discovered something crucial. The kind of evidence someone would need to remove quickly. Silas moved back to the desk, his control reasserting itself as they shaped a plan. We'll need Gianna to coordinate the security rotation, make sure we have trusted people in place. For the next hour, they refined the details. Bastian prepared a drive with carefully selected footage, while Silas and Talia mapped out camera positions and guard rotations. The chapel's architecture offered limited escape routes. Anyone trying to access the planted evidence would be forced to use the main doors. 2 teams, Silas decided, marking positions on the blueprint. 1 visible, 1 hidden. Full coverage of every angle. Talia studied the layout, adding her own notes. We'll need to make the bait convincing, something that would force immediate action. Use me, Silas said quietly. Plant evidence suggesting I've discovered the full scope of his operations. Make it look like I'm preparing to move against him. The room fell silent as they absorbed the weight of what they were planning. This wasn't just about catching a traitor, it was about bringing down someone who had been family. Bastian finished the last copy of the logs, securing them in separate safes. Drive's ready, he reported. I've included footage from the night of the fire, modified to suggest there's more recorded than there actually is. Silas nodded, his expression carved from stone. Get it in place. We move tonight. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Talia worked with Gianna to adjust security rotations, ensuring only trusted personnel were near the chapel. Silas coordinated with his teams, positioning them carefully out of sight. Just before midnight, Talia's phone buzzed. Tu Message appeared to be from Gianna. Come to the chapel alone. Proof your husband needs. She showed it to Silas immediately, watching his eyes narrow at the obvious trap. They're getting desperate, she said. This could work in our favor. You're not going in alone, he said firmly, but without the reflexive overprotectiveness she might have expected earlier. Instead, he was already adjusting their plan. We'll position the second team outside the chapel doors first. Everything gets recorded. Talia touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. We've planned for this. We have containment protocols in place. He covered her hand with his, and for a moment they stood in silence, understanding the magnitude of what they were about to do. Then Silas straightened, every inch the controlled leader, despite the personal stakes involved. Bastian, confirm the cameras are in position, he ordered. Gianna, get the second team in place. We move in 15 minutes. The next quarter hour was a precise dance of preparation. Guards shifted silently into position, cameras were double-checked, and communication channels were verified. Talia stood with Silas in the shadowed hallway, watching the chapel doors. Ready? He asked quietly. She nodded, feeling the weight of both their families' futures in this moment. Ready. The chapel door closed behind Talia with a soft click that echoed in the vast silence. Candlelight flickered from brass holders along the walls, casting dancing shadows across the ancient stone floor. The air felt thick with incense and secrets. Her footsteps were whisper quiet as she moved down the center aisle. Moonlight filtered through stained glass, painting colored patterns across the pews. Everything seemed too still, too staged. My dear niece. Arturo's voice emerged from behind the altar, smooth as aged whiskey. He stepped into view, his silver hair catching the candlelight, his expensive suit immaculate. His face wore the perfect mask of concerned family elder. I'm relieved you came. Talia kept her breathing steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. You have information for my husband? Information that could save him, yes. Arturo moved closer, his shoes clicking softly on stone. Though it pains me deeply to be the bearer of such news. He withdrew a small data drive from his breast pocket, holding it like a precious offering. The candlelight caught the tears gathering in his eyes, a masterful performance of the grieving uncle. I've watched him since he was a boy, guided him, protected him, to discover this betrayal. He shook his head sadly. What betrayal? Talia asked, careful to keep her voice neutral. Arturo pressed a button on a small remote. Footage flickered to life on the chapel wall, surveillance clips of Talia in the library carefully edited to remove context. She recognized the moments, her examining ledgers, making notes, accessing files. Without context, it painted a damning picture. I know you've been gathering intelligence, Arturo said softly. The question is, for whom? The chapel door opened. Talia didn't need to turn to know Silas had entered. She felt his presence like an electrical current in the air. Arturo smoothly pressed the drive into her palm, his timing impeccable. To anyone watching, it would appear she was accepting payment or proof of conspiracy. Silas, Arturo said, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. I wish you didn't have to see this. Talia turned slowly to face her husband. His face was carved from marble, eyes dark and unreadable as they moved from her hand to Arturo to the damning footage on the wall. The library footage is from 3 days ago, Arturo continued. She's been systematically accessing restricted files, making copies. I had to be certain before bringing this to you. He gestured to the drive in Talia's hand. The proof is there. For one terrible heartbeat, doubt flickered across Silas's face, sharp as a blade between them. Talia held his gaze steadily, refusing to plead or protest. They both knew the game being played. Her only move was to trust him completely. Take her to the East Wing, Silas ordered the guards, who had followed him in. His voice was winter cold. House arrest until this is verified. The guards moved forward, professional and impersonal. Talia submitted to their escort without resistance, her chin high. As they led her past Silas, she saw the muscle twitch in his jaw, the only tell in his perfect mask of controlled fury. I'm so sorry, nephew, Arturo said, placing a paternal hand on Silas's shoulder. I know how much you wanted to trust her. Silas shrugged off the touch. Leave me. I need to review this evidence personally. The guards escorted Talia through silent corridors to a suite in the East Wing. She heard the locks engage behind her as they posted outside her door. The room was comfortable but secure, a gilded cage for a suspected traitor. Minutes ticked by like hours as she waited, knowing Silas would be methodically examining every frame of footage, every timestamp, every detail. Their entire plan hinged on his legendary attention to detail. In his office, Silas sat alone in the dark, the glow of multiple screens illuminating his face as he reviewed the surveillance feeds again and again. His fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, breaking down each clip frame by frame. Something wasn't right with the nursery wing footage. He'd spent years studying surveillance, knew every quirk of their security system. There, in the bottom corner of the frame, a micro stutter in the time code that most would miss. He'd seen that particular glitch before, but only in elite operations. It was a signature tell of high-level manipulation. He leaned back in his chair, mind racing. The doctored footage wasn't just edited, it had been crafted by someone with access to military-grade tools. Someone who had been planning this for a very long time. The office remained dark, except for the blue glow of screens, each one frozen on that damning fraction of a second where the time code betrayed its own lie. Silas sat motionless, processing the implications of what he'd discovered. While outside his window, the night pressed close against the glass. The monitor room hummed with electric tension as Silas leaned closer to the screens, his reflection ghosted across multiple displays. The glitch in the nursery feed had a signature, a specific compression artifact that appeared at regular intervals. He'd seen it before in military-grade surveillance systems. "Pull up Elio's access logs," he ordered Bastion, who typed rapidly at the adjacent terminal. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Patterns emerged, login times that matched the compromised footage, system accesses that coincided with security breaches, all traceable to Elio's credentials. "Get him," Silas said quietly. The kind of quiet that made blood run cold. They found Elio at his post outside Talia's confined quarters, his face blanched when 4 of Silas's most trusted guards surrounded him. They escorted him to an underground room where concrete walls swallowed sound. Silas waited in a metal chair, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands relaxed on his thighs. Elio's steps faltered when their eyes met. "The nursery wing cameras," Silas said softly. "Show me how you did it." "Sir, I don't insult us both." Silas's voice remained eerily calm. "The compression artifact is military grade. Someone taught you that technique. Someone gave you access to very expensive tools." Sweat beaded on Elio's upper lip. His eyes darted to the door, where 2 guards stood like statues. "He said no one would get hurt," Elio whispered. "Just information, just eyes inside." "Who said?" "Arturo." The name fell from his lips like a stone. "He approached me 6 months ago, said he needed insurance, protection for the family. He paid well, showed me how to splice the feeds, route messages through secure channels." Silas leaned forward slightly. "And the attack on the east wall, the fire?" "I gave them the blind spots." Elio's voice cracked. "Arturo said it was just to scare her away. I didn't know they'd try to burn." "Names," Silas cut in. "Every contact, every drop point, every piece of intel you passed." The confession spilled out in a desperate torrent. Elio named names. Guards who'd looked the other way, staff who'd carried messages, drivers who'd mapped routes. With each revelation, Gianna's team moved through the estate like shadows, extracting the compromised pieces one by one. Those who cooperated immediately were confined to secure rooms. Those who resisted disappeared into deeper cells. Silas's machine of loyalty and consequence turned with brutal efficiency. The final piece clicked when Elio revealed Arturo's midnight meeting with Morozov, planned at a clifftop estate 20 miles up the coast. A property, purchased through shells within shells, meant to be untraceable. "Secure him," Silas ordered, standing. "Keep him alive until we verify everything." In his private armory, Silas methodically checked weapons while Gianna received his instructions. She would hold command of the estate, lock down all access points, and maintain direct communication only through their most secure channel. "If this goes wrong," he said, sliding a matte black pistol into its holster, "you know the protocols." Gianna nodded once, her face grim. "It won't go wrong." The walk to Talia's confined quarters felt longer than usual. Guards stepped aside as he approached. The lock clicked open under his palm, and he found her sitting in a chair by the window, still wearing the dress from the chapel confrontation. She turned to face him, chin lifted, eyes steady, ready for whatever truth he brought. "Elio confessed," he said without preamble. He was Arturo's inside man. The footage was doctored, the library surveillance spliced to create false narrative. "We've contained the compromised staff." Relief softened her shoulders, but her voice remained measured. "And Arturo." "Meeting Morozov at midnight. Coastal estate, 20 miles north." Silas moved closer, studying her face. "I'm going to end this tonight." "We're going to end this," she corrected firmly. He didn't argue. They were past that now. Instead, he opened the garment bag he'd brought. Tactical black dress, fitted for movement with reinforced seams. "Get changed," he said. "Bastion's bringing up your gear." While Talia dressed, Silas laid out the plan. They would approach by water, using the cliff shadows for cover. Gianna's team would lock down escape routes, while Bastion's surveillance unit mapped heat signatures inside. Clean, contained, decisive, Bastion arrived with a sleek case containing their tactical gear. Silas helped Talia adjust the Kevlar vest over her dress, his fingers efficient but gentle as he tightened the straps. The plates settled against her ribs, heavy but reassuring. "Good?" he asked, checking the fit. She nodded, testing her range of motion. The dress allowed for full movement while the vest provided vital protection. Silas worked methodically, helping her secure additional gear. Comms unit, backup weapon, silent alarm beacon. Their eyes met as he finished the final adjustments. In the contained space between them, understanding passed without words. They were in this together, partners facing whatever came next. Bastion waited by the elevator, his own tactical gear in place, tablet displaying real-time security feeds. As they stepped in, the estate's lights dimmed to tactical mode, corridors shifting to red-tinged darkness. The elevator hummed to life, carrying them down toward the garage where their team waited. Silas stood slightly in front of Talia, his body angled to shield her by instinct even now. She pressed her shoulder against his arm, a small point of contact grounding them. Both. Through the glass wall of the elevator, they watched the estate's lights transform level by level. Bright social spaces falling into shadow, security systems engaging, protective shells closing around the core, power cycling down to its most lethal configuration. The elevator continued its descent, smooth and silent. 3 people bound by necessity and choice, moving toward a confrontation that would reshape everything. Above them, the estate held its breath, waiting for dawn. Tires crunched over wet gravel as their vehicles killed their lights, approaching the seaside estate in formation. Rain slashed sideways, carried on bitter coastal winds that whipped against stone walls and weathered columns. Through night vision binoculars, Talia counted 6 Morozov guards positioned around the property's perimeter, their stances betraying professional training. Inside, warm light spilled from tall windows, casting elongated shadows across rain-slick marble. Arturo's silhouette moved between the panes, gesturing as he spoke to someone just out of view. The casual confidence in his stance made Talia's jaw tighten. He truly believed himself untouchable here. 12 inside, Bastion murmured through comms, reading thermal signatures. Main cluster in the great room, 2 by the service entrance, 3 upstairs. Silas checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Gianna, police patrols are staged 5 minutes out, on my signal." They moved like ghosts through the property's neglected gardens. Salt spray mixed with the musty scent of dead leaves and crumbling stone. Talia followed Silas's lead, placing her feet exactly where he did to avoid loose gravel. The rain provided cover, muffling their approach and reducing visibility. Thunder rolled across the sky as Silas gave the signal. In one coordinated movement, their team cut power to the entire estate. Darkness slammed down like a curtain, broken only by startled shouts and the snap of tactical lights switching on. Silas moved with lethal grace, each motion precise in economy. 2 perimeter guards went down before they could radio warning. Talia split left, using the terrain to her advantage. She triggered a series of small devices, harmless but loud, that scattered the remaining guards' attention. Inside was controlled chaos. Silas took point, dropping targets with brutal efficiency while Talia and Bastion's team secured their flanks. The sound of gunfire echoed off marble, sharp and desperate. They found Arturo in the great room, surrounded by Morozov's elite guards. Rain poured through broken windows, pooling on expensive carpets. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark bursts. Overturned furniture, drawn weapons, faces tight with tension. "Nephew?" Arturo's voice carried clearly despite the storm. "Always so dramatic." "It's over," Silas replied, his aim unwavering. "Surrender now, and perhaps some of your men survive this." Arturo's laugh was razor-edged. "You still don't understand. Everything I did was to make you stronger, to force you past these emotional weaknesses." His gaze flicked to Talia with naked contempt. "And you bring her here? Another liability." "The only liability," Talia said coldly, "was trusting you with power you never earned." Something ugly twisted Arturo's features. In one fluid motion, he drew a pistol and pivoted toward Silas's exposed back. Talia was moving before conscious thought, reading the tell in his shoulder. She launched herself forward, catching Arturo in a tackle that sent them both crashing into an antique table. His shot went wide, splintering a column. Silas spun at the sound, his expression terrible in its clarity. 3 precise shots ended the threat permanently, justice delivered with the finality of a judge's gavel. The remaining Morozov guards hesitated, reading the shift in power. In that moment of uncertainty, sirens began to wail in the distance. Gianna's failsafe kicked in, bringing official attention that would make this night radioactive for anyone connected to organized crime. "Choice time," Bastian announced, his weapon trained on the group. "Surrender to us or try explaining this scene to the incoming authorities." They chose surrender. Weapons clattered to marble floors as Bastian's team secured prisoners for transport. Through broken windows, red and blue lights began to paint the wet driveway. Talia's pulse still thundered in her ears as she stood, her dress soaked and torn, body humming with fading adrenaline. She found Silas watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, hands coming up to frame her face. Rain ran down his cheeks like tears, his breath ragged and warm against her skin. "I need you to understand something," he said, voice rough with emotion. "The vow I made, it wasn't about fear, it wasn't about control. I kept myself untouched because I was waiting to choose freely, to give everything to one woman who would see all of me and choose to stay." Lightning flashed again, catching in his eyes, showing her the raw truth there. On the black sand shoreline below, waves crashed against rocks in a primal rhythm that matched her heartbeat. "Yes," she said simply, putting every ounce of certainty into that single word. It was permission and claim and future all at once. They stood together in the rain, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, yet wrapped in something entirely their own. Behind them, sirens grew closer. Red and blue lights painted the wet driveway in alternating sweeps. The night wasn't over. There would be cleanup, consequences, loose ends to tie. But in this moment, with the storm raging and the ocean roaring below, none of that mattered. They had chosen each other freely, claimed each other completely. Everything else was just details. Morning light streamed through the library's restored windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany chessboard where Talia and Silas faced off in their daily match. The familiar scent of coffee and leather-bound books filled the air, a comforting constant in their evolving world. "Check," Talia announced, sliding her queen into position with quiet confidence. Her lips curved as Silas's eyebrows lifted, studying the trap she'd laid 3 moves ago. Around them, the estate hummed with the sounds of renewal. Construction crews replaced fire-damaged beams with reinforced steel, their measured work echoing through corridors that now felt more like home than fortress. The new staircases were wider, designed for 2 to walk comfortably side by side, a subtle but meaningful change that reflected their partnership. Silas conceded the game with a slight nod, his fingers brushing hers as he tipped his king. "Your strategy improves daily." "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, gathering the pieces. "Though I notice you're less ruthless in chess than business." "Only with you." His admission carried weight, like all their shared truths. They moved to the expanded wing where workers were installing the final shelves. Their books would live here together, her forensic texts beside his tactical manuals, ledgers sharing space with first editions. The room embodied their marriage, separate strengths woven into something stronger. Talia paused at the window, watching the garden's reconstruction below. "The roses are recovering well." Silas stepped behind her, close enough to share warmth without demanding. "Nature is resilient when properly tended." "Like trust?" She turned to face him, reading the subtle shifts in his expression that she'd learned to translate. "Yes." His hand found the small of her back, grounding them both. "The Morozov fragmentation reports came in this morning. Their power base is crumbling." "Good." Talia moved to her desk, fingers trailing over leather-bound ledgers. "Though I expect we'll be watching for splinter groups." "Always." Silas followed, respecting the space she needed while working. Gianna's team identified 3 potential concerns. I'd appreciate your analysis of their financial patterns. This was their new normal, decisions made in tandem, strengths complementing rather than competing. The morning passed in comfortable focus, broken by shared meals and quiet touches that carried heat without pressure. As afternoon softened toward evening, they walked the grounds together, inspecting security upgrades and greeting staff who had proven their loyalty during the crisis. The household had found its rhythm again, though now with added layers of protection and transparency. In the garden, fresh gravel crunched beneath their feet as they followed paths between rebuilt stone walls. The air was sweet with late blooms, nature reclaiming spaces scarred by fire and fighting. Talia stopped beside a newly planted rosebush, its buds promising future beauty. "Remember the first night when you thought I might be a threat?" "You were." Silas's smile held warmth. "Just not the kind I expected." "I threatened your control," she acknowledged, "but only the parts that were cages rather than armor. You gave me better defenses." He drew her closer, their bodies fitting together with practiced ease. Trust, partnership, purpose beyond power. The garden held them in private twilight as they renewed their vows without ceremony, not in formal words, but in shared truths and unhurried touches. Every kiss was still a choice, every embrace an affirmation. Stars began appearing overhead, diamond bright against deepening blue. The estate lights came on in program sequence, casting soft gold across restored paths and reinforced walls. "You were never the wrong bride," Silas murmured, threading their fingers together. "You were the only one." Talia squeezed his hand, feeling the strength and gentleness that had become her home. "Then let's build a world that knows it." They turned together toward the villa, where light spilled from windows that had witnessed their battles and victories. The door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing them into their shared sanctuary. The house settled around them, secure in its new foundations. In the library, their chessboard waited for tomorrow's match. In their private wing, ledgers and books stood together on reinforced shelves, telling the story of two people who chose each other and fought to keep that choice. Guards patrolled with quiet efficiency, protecting not just a fortress, but a home. In the kitchen, staff prepared dinner with the easy rhythm of a household at peace. Upstairs, their suite remained their private domain, a space where titles fell away and only truth remained. Life had found its balance, though they maintained their vigilance. Each day brought new challenges to face together: syndicate politics, business ventures, the constant dance of power and protection. But they met each one as partners, their strengths multiplied by trust. The estate had transformed like they had, stronger for being tested, more beautiful for being rebuilt with purpose. Steel reinforced stone, just as love reinforced duty. Every repair and upgrade reflected their shared vision. A fortress that was also a home, a partnership that was also a passion. Their marriage was no longer a contract, but a choice renewed each day. They practiced it in every decision shared, every secret turned to truth, every touch freely given and received. The heat between them burned bright but patient, built on understanding that consent made desire deeper. External threats still existed. They always would in their world, but the foundation they'd built together proved stronger than any storm. The Morozov threat had splintered against their unity, and other challengers would learn the same lesson. To strike at one was to face both. The estate hummed with its new equilibrium, a harmony of purpose and protection, strength and tenderness. In their private moments, they were simply Silas and Talia, two people who found each other across battle lines and chose to build something extraordinary together.